Okay, so this is trench 3, which really connects the eastern and western extents of the bathhouse, spanning the sort of suite of rooms across the entire width of the structure. And in this area, it's been expanding on what we did last year, removing a lot more of the Edwardian backfill, and then trying to unpick the phasing of the architecture. So the rooms I'm standing on, we assume to be sort of tepid area, the warm rooms. We've just been a case of cleaning off and trying to understand what's going on with the phasing of the brickwork and the walls. So beneath my feet we've got plaster floors that have been built up from earlier phases, the establishment of a stoke hole that would have fired a hypercaust for a warm room here, sat upon an earlier floor. And then here we've got well, this area is a little bit up for grabs. Was it a warm room? Potentially may have been a plunge pool with a step here coming down onto hard mortar floors. And then these much earlier phase 1 green sand walls, which delineate what was originally the eastern side of the bathhouse, and trying to unpick what happens in this small nook just in front of me. So there seems to be a drain running out from one of the early plunge pools into this area, where they presumably once had some kind of ceramic or wood water conveyance to take wastewater out into the ditch to the east. And at some point they've dug through this area and lowered it and inserted a drain, potentially a sort of soak away, ceramic lined with timber unders, which has then led to this kind of concretion of the clay at the base of it. So we're in the middle of trench 3. And again, this is an expansion of an area that we just got a glimpse of last year, and really trying to unpick the phasing. So this tile and mortar bedded structure that's in front of me was sort of enigmatically found at the end of last season, quite low down, and assumed to be one of the earliest things on site. And this year we've just been revealing a lot more of it, trying to understand what it is. We know it's early, it's cut quite low down, it seems to have a return here, and then ends just to my right, and then it's been robbed away quite significantly by the Romans in the later Roman period, with other rooms built on top of it. But it is quite bizarre, and it seems to be at least, well, potentially 3-sided, perhaps having an open face, and flanking it on both sides, cut well down into the foundations of the tile courses there. There's this wooden lined drain. So as we get closer to the water table and to the ditch to the east, there's obviously water coming up and needs to be drained away. So this is a building which is much earlier than the sort of Neronian bathhouse as we assume it to be. So potentially very close to the invasion in 43 AD. What it is, we're not entirely sure. Hopefully next year we'll get a better look at it. Was it somewhere where people came to get water? Was it an early bath? Was it an open-sided shrine where people made offerings? We're yet to find out, but hopefully next year we should be able to get a good look at the rest of it and understand it a bit better. So from geophysics and aerial photographs, we had an inkling of an idea that this was an Iron Age ditch, an associated rampart, but through excavation, evidence of actual Iron Age activity has been pretty thin on the ground. So there's quite a high suggestion that as the Romans came along, they may have well recut, sort of reworked, just dug out what was probably an Iron Age precursor to this defensive ditch, and just made it more fortified. And then over the passage of time, the Romans have used it as a ditching ground, a dumping ground for any material that's been stripped out of the suite of baths to my right. So as people would have been remodelling the rooms, changing the architecture, stripping away some of the plaster and moving floors and that kind of stuff, they would have obviously found that the ditch was a perfect place just to dump their demolition material. So you can see on this section behind me to my right that there's just huge amounts of waste material from the Roman occupation. So huge amounts of rubble, crushed brick, opus signinum, plaster, flint, all kinds of material that's architecturally based, but also the remnants of material used to heat the rooms in the tepid area and the hot rooms as well. So obviously they were burning a lot of wood and sweeping out that ash and finding somewhere to dump it. So you can see these dark lenses of material as well. So as we went down, a lot of that material was interwoven with the deposits that also included just the general build-up of material that you would find in a ditch. So lots of natural material from trees and general sort of forest detritus. But it has made for good preservation. Obviously we're below the water table, so survival of things like leather and wood, wattle fences that we found, stakes standing upright, and bone, proving that people were, obviously using agriculture and farming and eating lots of things in this area. So a couple of weeks ago, just beneath my feet, we made a quite amazing discovery of a completely preserved fallen wattle fence. So the number of stakes that were upright in the ground, and then a completely woven wooden fence laid, completely preserved, and on top of that, just coincidentally, there happened to be a human skull. So the skull lacked any other articulated parts of its body, so it was just the skull, missing the lower mandible as well, and it just seems to have been coincidentally sat on top of this wicker fence.
Then I just can't hear trouble from there. Yeah, the side should literally lift up.
It's a male from the age of 25 to 35 with no obvious trauma. The skull was found in a fairly organic peaty layer, quite low down beneath my feet, but amongst that layer was still quite a large range of Roman artefacts, so pottery, architectural materials, same ware. So the idea that it was potentially an Iron Age skull doesn't necessarily pan out. So the discovery of a number of dog skulls at the base of a ditch is quite an interesting find, and over the next few weeks and months we'll have a zoo archaeologist who will look at those skulls and be looking for signs of perhaps cut marks to determine whether maybe they were deliberately killed and used for furs, or perhaps there's something just a little bit more interesting about it. Maybe they were a votive deposition for reasons that we don't know. So during the excavation of the ditch, it's obviously very difficult with the amount of groundwater swelling up and confusing us all. So in terms of trying to understand the stratigraphic sequence of the ditch, it did get a little bit confusing. But what we could do, and what we've done over the last couple of days, is to take a series of samples through the layers of the ditch by using a plastic drain pipe, hit into the stratigraphy, taking that soil out in its sequence, and then taking it back to the laboratory where we'll get a finer look at the micro detail of the layers and try and analyse what's going on. Is there stabilisation of particular areas? Are there cuts that we haven't seen where the ditch has been reworked, or is it just a slow sequence of things building up over a long time?